Hello, my name is Katrina Cochrane. I am an assessor. I assess many adults and children, and I'm a trainer and very passionate about dyslexia and identifying dyslexia in both adults and children. And this webinar is around what to do if you think you might be dyslexic and what to do after, how to signpost somebody if they are dyslexic. So it's only a short training session, but if you have any questions, do contact me at the end. We know around about 15% of the population are dyslexic. These are huge numbers. We know around about 40% of billionaires are dyslexic, so they're the success stories. But we also know around about 50% of offenders are dyslexic also. So it's really important that we identify as young as possible. But we know that that doesn't happen. Many dyslexic adults have never had an assessment, and many are coping, and they're coping okay. And there's lots of reasons why they might need an assessment later on, though. We're going to try and look at some of those reasons. From the Rose Review, there came a common definition of dyslexia, where dyslexia is a learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling. Not every dyslexic is unable to read, for example. We know about 80% of students aren't picked up with dyslexia until they get to university. So we know that they can read. We know there's no problem with their reading, but they have a problem with reading huge amounts of text, for example, or picking out keywords in a piece of text put together into an essay, for example. More importantly are the difficulties in phonological awareness. So being able to break down words, hearing the fine sounds in words, that kind of thing. Verbal memory and verbal processing speed. Dyslexia can occur across a range of intellectual abilities. Most adults that I assess are of average or above average intelligence, but you can get it at the other end of the scale as well. And it's best thought of as a continuum, not a distinct category, and there's no clear cut-off points. And this is really important because we now look at the neurodiverse profile. And many thanks here to Amanda Kirby, Professor Amanda Kirby, and we'll talk about the Do It profile a bit later on. But this really shows that the overlap between all of these other different difficulties is the rule, not the exception. More and more people that I'm assessing have got a range of these difficulties. So 1 in 2 people with dyslexia will also have dyscalculia. And that's very important that we look at this whole profile in terms of what difficulties may be alongside that profile of dyslexia. Is it ADHD? Is it autism? And we're adding to these difficulties all the time. So tic disorder, also OCD, for example, being added here. But the range of difficulties is very diverse. This shows you also that the overlapping nature of dyslexia here may well go into lots and lots of these different areas. ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, all of these different areas. So it is the norm, really, rather than unusual that someone's got just pure dyslexia. And the other thing is that the majority of these things are seen as medical and not educational. So somebody's first path may be through the medical route to the doctor and being signposted on from the doctor, but actually it's the educational route that they need. There are many difficulties experienced by adults. I did a talk recently about tipping points, and I think tipping points are very, very helpful to understand that a child may experience a tipping point with their dyslexia when the strategies just aren't enough, maybe at GCSE, maybe at A-level, maybe at university. But sometimes that tipping point doesn't come until that person is an adult. And there are lots of reasons why they get to that tipping point. But all of those strategies that they've got in place, which have got them to that point, just aren't enough. And you can see there from that picture, the memory is like a shelf, for example. And if you put too much onto that shelf, shelf collapses and you lose everything. And that's often what I see, that there's just too much overload of information and they haven't got enough strategies to deal with what's happening now. We know that dyslexic adults, well, I mean, this is the other thing. I get lots of adults come to me and say, I used to be dyslexic. You don't grow out of it. If you're a dyslexic child, you are still a dyslexic adult, but you may be a compensated dyslexic. So all of the reasons why you might be dyslexic as a child, the difficulties with sequencing, difficulties with memory, difficulties with organisation, difficulties with literacy perhaps, multitasking, all those things, you still got as an adult. And there may be many reasons why that adult might want to have a further assessment now. They may never have been formally assessed at school. Many children are never assessed at school. Or they may have been tested, but only for exam access arrangements. And schools tend to do this in year 9, year 10. They give a range of tests, and that will allow that person to have extra time, possibly a reader, possibly a scribe, modified paper, all of these different things, but it doesn't give a diagnosis. So they get something called Form 8, but it's not a diagnosis. That's enough for GCSE, that's enough for A-level, but it's not enough for university if they want to apply for disabled students allowance. Other reasons might be that they were assessed as a child. And generally, if that report was done by somebody with a current assessment practicing certificate, that report can go all the way through into university. But it may be that they weren't assessed by somebody with that current APC. It could be that the report is out of date, or they may have lost that report. Lots of people come to me and say, I was assessed 10 years ago, but I've lost the report. We don't keep reports for longer than about 7 years. So if that happens, then sadly, you do need to have that assessment done again. I get lots of people coming to me because they're doing professional exams. So they might be doing exams for accountancy, for example, legal exams, exams for the police, all sorts of exams like that. And they might need a current report for that particular reason. They may have a new job and they want to know where they are in terms of that new job. They may just want an explanation of their difficulties. And I get people in their 60s, even their 70s, wanting to have a full diagnostic assessment because they're just fed up of not knowing and whether or not they are just thick. And generally speaking, they're not. They're very bright, they're not thick at all, and it's been an explanation of their difficulties. Or they might just want access to work. And we talk about labels. Sometimes labels are really helpful. Other times they're not helpful at all. But sometimes for any of these reasons, that label is really important. A lot of adults come to me and ask if they need a diagnostic assessment, and I always run through all of the reasons why they might need it, and a lot of times I put them off. It's very expensive getting a full diagnostic assessment. It can be as much as £1,000 with some assessors, but it's not always necessary. If you're at university and you're applying for disabled students allowance, yes, it is necessary. If you're doing professional exams and you need those access arrangements like extra time or use of electronic readers, software, anything like that, yes, you do need that full diagnostic assessment. But to just go for access to work, you don't need any evidence, really. A screener is enough evidence. So you can see there on the right-hand side, the Do It profile I spoke about earlier that Professor Amanda Kirby has put together. That gives a lovely report, and it's probably about £30–40, much, much cheaper than a full diagnostic assessment, and ample for access to work support. It's always worth asking the question. So what do you do if you think you might be dyslexic? Often the very first question I ask somebody is there dyslexia in the family? And generally speaking, chances are that person will be dyslexic if there is dyslexia in the family. So oftentimes a child has been assessed and the parent will say to me, well, I have those problems at school. Do you think I might be dyslexic as well? So that's often when they start thinking that they may have dyslexia and want to do something about it. There are lots of checklists around, and they're a good starting point. So that on the BDA website, there's an adult checklist, and that will ask you questions about, did you get your left and right hand muddled up? Are you poor at directions? Do you find it difficult to write in public? Do you get your B's and D's muddled up? All those classic questions, but sometimes just doing them all together just crystallizes the fact that there might be some further indications that you realize about. And if you did want to do a commercial screener, there's plenty out there. There's Quick Scan, Quick Screen, Do It Profiler. All of those things are good and give you a report and will signpost effectively. I always ask about vision as well, and many adults have got difficulties with vision that they haven't associated with dyslexia. You don't have to have visual difficulties, obviously, and be dyslexic, but it does often go hand in hand. Sometimes people say that the print jumps about, or they see rivers of print, or swirls of print, or swirls of print, all of those different things. And for them, using a coloured overlay, changing the background colour of their computer, and a visit to an optometrist is a really, really sensible idea. You can see here that I don't have a white background on my slides because black print on white often glares. If you do decide to go ahead and have a full diagnostic assessment, make sure that you go to a specialist assessor who's got a level 7 qualification, and preferably an assessment practicing certificate. And you can look that up, look them up on the SASC website, sasc.org.uk, look up their name and check that it's current. Or they need to be an educational psychologist who's HCPC registered. So just check their qualifications, because it's a lot of money to hand over. And what we look for is this typical dyslexic spiky profile where somebody is often very good in certain areas and not so good in others. So for this particular person here, you can see that they haven't got very good working memory. So working memory is your ability to hold information and manipulate it. So multitasking, very difficult often for that dyslexic adult. They've got slow processing speed and their reading speed is slow, but they've got various other areas where they are very, they've got sound skills. And as I say, this is a very, very typical dyslexic profile. These dyslexic adults are often verbally very bright, very articulate, and that's their strength. They're often very practical as well. I come across a lot of adults who've got very good practical skills, and they can make things, do things, and that's their strengths, but they don't like writing. Many dyslexic adults, if they're on the dyspraxic side, have found it very difficult to learn to drive, and they may have not passed their driving test the first time. So lots of different reasons. Making up that person's profile, and we really want to bring out their strengths. And I think this is one of the good things about having a full diagnostic assessment done, is actually understanding your strengths and challenges And for that adult, actually understanding that they are bright, that they can do things, can be very, very positive for them. It can also be, there can also be quite an emotional response to that diagnosis as well. So be careful, because I have got a lot of adults who, being faced with the fact that they are dyslexic, go through almost a period of mourning, because they think, well, I could have done that, I might have done that, my life might have ended up in a different direction if I'd known this earlier. So there are support groups out there that help with that emotional response to that diagnosis. Well, we've had a lot of things recently, haven't we? And COVID has, well, good and bad things actually, has happened as a result of COVID. One of the good things is that I've been able to do training sessions like this online. All of our tests went online as well, so I can now assess somebody in Germany, America, Scotland, wherever. So that has been quite positive for us. We reach a wider audience, so that's been good. But for the adult who has had to work at home during COVID, all of a sudden they've had to find an office area. They've had to share that office area and laptops with children. It's been busier, noisier. If they haven't liked change, then all of a sudden they've had to change to a different way of working, then going back into the office. And now what I'm finding is this hybrid working, where they're partly in the office, partly at home. Good and bad again. So lots of things that are good about that hybrid working. Many neurodiverse adults like working at home because they don't necessarily like that interaction with their colleagues that they have to do in the office. They're much happier working from home. They can get up when they want to. They can start earlier, for example, finish later. So there are lots of positives, but it has impacted on these dyslexic adults and the way that we work. The next step, once someone has had a diagnosis, either through a screener or a diagnostic assessment, is that we would suggest a workplace needs assessment for that adult. And this takes around about 2.5 hours. And before we do it, we send out a detailed questionnaire to the employer and the employee. We get lots and lots of information from both parties, and we find out exactly what's going on in their job. Are they having difficulties with those interactions with their colleagues? Are they finding it difficult to write reports? Are they finding it difficult to find information quickly? Do they need extended training? Do they need any kinds of technology that could support them better? We get a copy of their job description, so it's very bespoke to that individual. We look exactly at what they're doing in their job, how we can support them better. Now, these can be in person or online. I've done a lot of these online recently. They do work. If it's in person, we can look at their office in person. We can look at whether or not they've got one desktop computer, whether or not they've got 2 screens, whether or not their office space is tidy, their desk is tidy, or are they showing poor organisational skills? Is their diary crossed out a lot? Do they have a diary? Are there lots of sticky notes everywhere? All of these different things, really, really building up that picture of the employee. And I have colleagues who've gone down in submarines even for a couple of days to actually shadow that person and really find out about their job. It's also a really good opportunity to have a discussion with the line manager. And I find that's very important, because often the line manager doesn't understand dyslexia. They may, in some cases, not know how to support that person because they just don't understand what dyslexia is, or they think it's just about reading and spelling. They don't understand that wider interpretation of dyslexia. I remember going into a company before COVID, and it was very interesting because the line manager was dyslexic, and you would think that that would be a perfect opportunity for that line manager to really support their person on their team with dyslexia. Actually, it was disastrous. because the line manager only thought that the things that had helped her could be used with that person. And she really didn't understand that everybody's profile is completely different. Everybody I've ever assessed has got a different profile. And so what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. So it was a really good opportunity to talk with that line manager and really support that person that I came in to see, to understand that it was causing friction between them. If we look at Harbinder, for example, and have a look at a case study here. So Harbinder works for a national bank. And one of the interesting things about banks, obviously there's huge numbers of employees who work for banks. Sometimes they don't realise that not only 15% of their employees can be dyslexic, but 15% of their customers also are dyslexic, and they really need to address their needs as well as their employees. So Harbinder had recently been promoted and all of a sudden had to do more reports. And this was difficult for her, all of a sudden having to write more reports. During COVID, she had struggled from working from home, but she's now in the office twice a week. But what I saw was these poor organisational skills, forgetting meetings. When I did her assessment, she actually was half an hour late actually turning up for the meeting, which was very, very rare. Most people, it's ingrained in their head that they've got an assessment because they're quite worried about it. So I'd never come across somebody who actually forgot completely about their assessment and turned up late. But it really did indicate these poor organisational difficulties. Her line manager had noticed difficulties with spelling and in the structure of her writing. And when I got her to do some writing, it didn't quite make sense, her writing. It was very stylized, and the over stylization of her handwriting was disguising her spelling often. But she was finding it very stressful, and she'd beforehand in jobs, she'd put in the extra hours and been able to catch up by coming in early, working late. But with this job, she found her tipping point, and as a result, she wasn't sleeping well. And this was adding to her anxiety about her new job, and she was worried she was going to lose it. She didn't feel the culture of the organisation was very sympathetic, and she was very worried she might lose her job, actually, if she said anything or disclosed her dyslexia. So for Harbinder, what we thought of was some support with her spelling, some work with a specialist tutor, and these adult tutors are trained to work with adult dyslexics and could give her some support with her spelling, with her organisational skills. Really important to signpost her to the GP if she wasn't sleeping properly as well. And also as that opportunity to speak to the line manager and sort of start training the organisation to be more inclusive as well, so that companies didn't feel that any kind of adjustments were going to cost them a lot of money. I think this is a real concern for organisations, that any kind of adjustment for a dyslexic employee is going to be costly. It isn't. There are very, very few costs involved, particularly as Access to Work will pay for the majority of any kind of technology or support for that person. Lots of things that Access to Work will provide. So it may be, like myself, that person needs an extra screen, for example. And I find that very, very helpful, being able to look at one screen, put information across more quickly, compare things on two screens. So it would pay for things like that. It would pay for text-to-speech software or speech-to-text software. It would pay for that coaching with a specialist adult coach. One adult I used to work with, and he was a postman and was putting the post in the wrong houses. Access to Work paid for a support worker to go on his round with him and make sure that the post went to the right letterbox. So very important. Support workers can help with things like organisational skills, setting up diaries, helping somebody in a sort of practical way. So that is a possibility. And it may be that that person just needs some additional mentoring. It could be from their line manager, or there could be somebody within the organisation who has been picked out to be an advisor, a mentor, perhaps because they are dyslexic themselves and they have navigated their way through the company, and they can pass on lots of good tips and advice. We also talk about changing things like the way in which we present information, getting companies to look at a dyslexia-friendly text, for example, and having that throughout their organisation. Using something like Arial, Calibri, Trebuchet, anything apart from Times New Roman, which is very spiky and difficult to read. Making that font size bigger, and not sending out any kind of email that's in italics, that's very difficult to read as well. Making it a line spaced 1.25 at least on your emails makes it much, much easier to read. All of these little things are free, make a big difference to the dyslexic adult. These are from the Dyslexia Style Guide, and you can download that from bdadyslexia.org.uk. And, you know, obviously things like white paper, glares, black print on white paper, making sure that things like presentations are done on off-white, like this. This is done on a very sort of pale green so that it's easier to read. Lots of other resources that can help. So things like Grammarly or Ginger software. There's a license you can buy, but you can also get a free version, and that's often enough for many people to use. They are really good because they can help you with replacing words, help you with spelling, help with syntax, putting things together in a better way. That really helps. A lot of adults I know really like Kindle, so if they're reading anything, they prefer to read it on a Kindle because they can make the font size bigger. And also it's a grey background, and it's much, much easier to read than the white page of a paperback, say. And also you can change the font in a Kindle, and there are some dyslexic fonts now, like Open Dyslexic, or the new font that's used by the BDA, so they're really good. If they're working in an office, a noise-reducing set of headphones, not expensive, can really block out the noise around that person, help them concentrate. Again, £20, something like that. If they've got visual difficulties, then things like coloured overlays are really helpful. If you're working from home and that coloured overlay really helps you, then no one's going to know that you're using it if you're working from home. Reading pens, this is the reading pen from Scanning Pens, and that can be wonderful for many adults, even those who aren't dyslexic but have got sight difficulties, because you just pass that pen over the line of text and it will read it out to you in your headphones. Wonderful for people who can't access text easily. The mobile phone, amazing piece of kit there. So you can have things like dictaphone, use it as a dictaphone. You can send yourself messages, you can have all your apps on there. It will help you with remembering appointments. Things like Alexa is wonderful as well, because you can ask it how to spell something, it'll tell you the correct spelling. So using technology as much as possible, and using free technology. There's lots of things like free immersive readers on Microsoft now, which are great also. I have a friend of mine who's she's actually a CEO of a company and is dyslexic. And when she goes out on her car, she will phone herself up on her mobile phone and leave herself messages. And she finds that an effective way of remembering things. You know, we know now that somebody's job is protected under the Equality Act, and it is a disability under the Act. So you have got to make reasonable adjustments for that person in the workplace. You mustn't discriminate against that person, and they mustn't be bullied or harassed because of their dyslexia. So if somebody is worried about disclosing that they are dyslexic, they are protected, their job is protected, and the company does need to make these reasonable adjustments. As I say, most of them will be covered by access to work support. They don't need to put in any money. It may be that access to work will only pay for a set number of coaching sessions, and the company does feel afterwards it's good practice to sort of carry on those lessons. So many companies are seeing the positive aspects of somebody with dyslexia, and seeing that, you know, how expensive it is to recruit somebody. So it's much better to enable that person to do their job effectively, rather than lose that person and have to recruit again. And many companies are also looking at their own customers. They're looking at things like their websites, for example. Are they dyslexia friendly? Is their whole recruitment process dyslexia friendly? Are they asking the right questions on application forms, for example? So a recent application form that I saw said, you know, do you consider yourself to have a disability? Many adults with dyslexia don't necessarily consider it a disability and then won't answer yes. And so therefore it's not picked up quickly enough. And so it should be picked up much, much more quickly for somebody starting a job. And then the right kind of adjustments can be put in place for them. You know, we are now looking at the positive aspects of dyslexia that, you know, we shouldn't judge. As a society, we do tend to judge someone's intelligence on how well they spell, and that's wrong. These are people who've got a huge amount of skills. They're often very, very articulate. They've got these excellent verbal skills. They are creative, innovative, the big picture thinkers, but they're often determined and resilient as well. They will put in so much extra work into their job that by the end of the day, they're often exhausted. And it's really, really worth knowing that these adults will suffer fatigue by the end of the day, and perhaps looking at their working practice, how they work best, when they work best, giving them additional breaks possibly, really will get the best out of them, because they have got such good skills and they will bring a lot to a company. So this was only a short talk about how to identify dyslexia and what to do next. I am a trustee of the Adult Dyslexia Centre, and they have that free support group that meets weekly. They meet in person and online, and they're a great organisation to join. They are www.adc.org.uk, so Adult Dyslexia Centre. Look them up. Be with other people who are going through the same difficulties. Do contact me. There's my email details. Contact me at any time. And my website is positivedyslexia.co.uk, because I genuinely feel there is a lot to be positive about if you're dyslexic. As I say, many adults are coping quite well with their dyslexia. They don't need to be identified. They don't need to go through this process. But if you do, it's not a difficult process. And if you go on gov.uk, access to work, you can get the support that you need to do your job well. Wishing you all best of luck, but do contact me at any time. Thank you.